These outcomes can only be achieved if the company scales. Customers. A startup's customers may have a mixed attitude towards scaling. If the startup can lower its costs and boost the value of its products for customers, then customers are likely to benefit from the startup's effective scaling. Moreover, if the company grows to the point where it can go public, then the customer may benefit since the capital provided will increase the odds that the startup will survive. Scaling could have a downside for customers if it keeps the startup from developing new products and delivering excellent service. Partners, particularly suppliers, may benefit as a startup scales. In general, the bigger the startup, the more supplies it will purchase. If the supplier can satisfy the growing demand and become more efficient in the process of scaling, then it may pass along some of the cost savings to the startup in the form of lower prices. On the other hand, if the supplier becomes too dependent on the startup for its revenues, the startup may use its bargaining power to force the supplier to slash prices. Capital providers can only realize a return on their investment if a startup scales to the point where it is acquired or goes public. If the acquirer has a record of boosting the sales of acquired startups' products, the investor may be better off accepting the acquirer's stock. However, if the startup CEO has the potential to be a marathoner, capital providers will be better off if the startup can keep scaling after its IPO. Universities can benefit from developing courses about startup scaling, particularly if they already sponsor incubators and startup competitions or teach entrepreneurship. If universities can provide scaling skills to more graduates, their alumni may achieve greater career success. This would burnish the university's reputation and potentially enrich its endowment if the successful entrepreneurs donate to the university. Government policymakers may benefit if more of their local entrepreneurs become sprinters or marathoners, an outcome that would be more likely if local founders were better at scaling. Scaling research. To gain a deeper understanding of how to scale successfully, I set out to answer the following questions. Are there specific traits typical of CEOs who will become sprinters or marathoners? How do such CEOs define the revenue tiers that their startup will reach as it scales? My interviews with CEOs revealed that each CEO has different revenue tiers. Therefore, I reframe the question to focus on the principal business goals of each scaling stage. How should CEOs create and sustain a culture that helps their startup to scale? What growth trajectories are most likely to turn an idea into a large company? What are the best sources of capital for each of a scaling startup's revenue tiers? And how do the most effective CEOs persuade these capital providers to invest? How do effective CEOs redefine jobs as their startups scale? How do they decide whom to hire, promote, and let go at each revenue tier? How do effective CEOs set goals as a startup scales and hold everyone accountable for achieving those goals? How do CEOs change the way they coordinate processes as their startup scales? How do CEOs decide whether they should continue to lead their company as it scales? To investigate these questions and refine my scaling model, I interviewed 88 CEOs and 6 venture capital investors in Boston, Cambridge, Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, and Munich. I sought founders and investors who could describe their experience with the 7 startup scaling levers. For each lever, I looked for successful and unsuccessful case studies at each of the 4 scaling stages. The Scaling Roadmap. This book presents the findings of this research in 2 sections. Part 1, Exploring the Scaling Model. Chapters 2 through 8 examine more deeply each of the 7 startup scaling levers. Creating Growth Trajectories, Chapter 2. Raising Capital, Chapter 3. Sustaining Culture, Chapter 4. Redefining Job Functions, Chapter 5.